Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The wind howled like a creature in pain, and the snow whipped through the air with such force that the world outside the small cabin was little more than a blinding white blur. Inside, the warmth of the fire flickered against the chill, casting long shadows across the room. Nathan sat near the hearth, sipping on a cup of tea, his eyes half-lidded in the way that only solitude could bring. The hut was a simple affair, a haven he'd built for himself after years of hunting the wilderness on this remote, forgotten planet. The storm outside was one of the worst he'd seen in months. The weather here was often unpredictable, but this was beyond the norm, ferocious and untamed, the kind of storm that could claim a man's life if he weren't careful. Nathan had been out hunting earlier, but when the storm picked up, he returned quickly, knowing how unforgiving the wilderness could be. He'd brought in enough supplies for the week, and as the wind screamed, he felt a sense of comfort in the solitude. But that comfort shattered in an instant. The door of the hut flew open with a crash, the heavy wooden frame slamming against the wall. Snow and ice blew into the cabin, and Nathan sprang to his feet instinctively, grabbing the rifle by his side. His heart pounded in his chest as the figure staggered into the room. She was unlike anything Nathan had ever seen. The woman was tall, unnaturally so, and her skin was an odd shade of deep iridescent blue that seemed to shimmer even in the low light of the cabin. Her hair, long and silver, whipped about her face like a banner caught in a gust of wind. She was dressed in thin, tattered garments, more suited to a warm climate than the deadly cold outside. Her eyes, wide with fear, were an unsettling shade of yellow, alien, predatory even. She was gasping for breath, her body trembling from the cold and the strain of the storm. As she looked around the room, her eyes locked onto Nathan's, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Fear. That was the first thing Nathan noticed in her expression. It wasn't the usual fear of someone facing a threat or danger. This was deeper, more primal. Her gaze darted to the rifle in his hand, then back to his face, as though she had just realized that he was human. For a brief, heart-stopping second, she seemed to consider fleeing. But the storm outside was too fierce for escape. Nathan slowly lowered the rifle, trying to ease the tension that had crept into the air. He'd seen enough wild things in his time on this planet to recognize that this was no ordinary human. She wasn't from around here. In fact, she wasn't from anywhere he knew. "You're safe here," Nathan said, his voice rough with the quiet of isolation. His words were meant to reassure her, though he wasn't sure why he was offering comfort to someone who had just burst into his life without warning. The alien woman took a cautious step forward, her movements fluid but hesitant. She shivered violently, her lips pale and trembling. Nathan quickly moved to close the door, blocking out the howling wind and the blizzard's fury. The sudden shift in temperature in the hut made the woman stagger, and she caught herself on the edge of the table. Nathan set the rifle down on a nearby chair and moved toward her. He didn't know what to say or even how to act. But there was something about her presence that unsettled him, something beyond the mere fact that she was an alien. There was a deep, almost instinctive fear in her eyes, like a prey animal caught in a trap. He hesitated for a moment before offering her a hand. "You're in no condition to be outside. Come, sit by the fire." Her eyes flickered to his hand, then back to his face, still wary, but something in her expression softened. She seemed to weigh her options for a moment, then slowly took his hand. Her touch was cold, unnaturally so, like ice itself had taken form. She flinched slightly when she made contact, but Nathan gently guided her to the warmth of the fire, where she collapsed into a chair with a weary sigh. Her body trembled from the cold, but there was a more unsettling feature to her trembling, as though it wasn't entirely from the chill. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face with a mix of distrust and curiosity. Nathan stood for a moment, unsure of what to do next. He knew he should offer her something to eat, maybe a blanket, but everything he did felt like a step into the unknown. This wasn't a situation that could be solved with simple hospitality. The weight of her presence, alien, frightened, and somehow dangerous, hung in the air. "My name's Nathan," he said at last, trying to break the silence. "What's yours?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she continued to stare at him as though considering whether or not to speak. Her mouth opened once, then closed again, her tongue flicking out to touch her lips nervously. She looked like she wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. Nathan knelt down beside the fire, giving her space but staying close enough that she wouldn't feel alone. He carefully poured some tea into a mug and set it on the table in front of her. "Tea might help warm you up," he offered. She stared at the mug, then back at Nathan, still unsure of him. Please, I won't hurt you, Nathan said, his voice gentle but firm. I'm just trying to help. She looked at him for a long intense moment and then, very slowly, her hands reached for the mug. Her fingers brushed the handle, hesitant at first, before she finally picked it up and took a tentative sip. Her face contorted in surprise, as though the warmth of the drink was an unexpected relief. Nathan exhaled, a small weight lifting off his chest. She wasn't completely gone to fear. She was still here, still human enough in her responses to feel comfort from the simplest of things. But that didn't explain why she was here in the first place, why she'd run straight into his hut from the blizzard, or why she was so terrified. As she drank in silence, Nathan watched her carefully, his thoughts racing. He had a feeling that her arrival was no accident. Something, somewhere, had brought her to his door, and that something could change everything. Before he could ask another question, the woman's voice broke through the tension. They're coming for me? Her voice was low, strained, and full of raw fear. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken dread. Nathan's pulse quickened. Who's coming for you? He asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. He couldn't help but notice the sharp, almost desperate edge in her voice. There was more to her presence here than just a chance encounter. She was staring into the fire, her face a mixture of fear and uncertainty. Her long, silver hair shimmered in the flickering light, like something ethereal, and she kept her hands wrapped around the warm mug, as though trying to hold on to some small piece of normalcy. They hunt me, she said, her voice trembling slightly. They want to find me. Capture me. Use me. Nathan frowned. The language was familiar, but the implications were not. The idea of being hunted, chased across this wild, frozen planet, sounded like something out of a nightmare, not reality. The storm outside roared louder as though reacting to her words, and Nathan felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. Who are they? Nathan pressed, trying to maintain control of the conversation, even as his mind raced. The blizzard outside was still in full force, the howling wind filling the cabin as if trying to block out the truth. His gaze flickered to the windows, half expecting to see something moving in the storm, something lurking just beyond the glass. The woman looked up at him, her golden eyes reflecting the firelight. There was something ancient in her gaze, as if she had lived through eons of suffering. Her voice was strained, barely above a whisper. I'm not from this world. I am an experiment, a part of something much larger than you can understand. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. Experiment? This wasn't just a simple case of a lost traveler. This was something deeper, something he wasn't prepared for. He didn't know if she was talking about herself in the literal or metaphorical sense, but either way the implications were chilling. Experiment? He echoed, his voice rough. You're telling me you're not human? She shook her head slowly, the silver strands of her hair catching the light. I'm not from here, no. My people are far away from a world beyond the stars. But I've been hunted, captured, and tested. For years they've been trying to break me. Her words hung heavy in the room, a deep sense of sorrow radiating from her. Nathan's heart went out to her, but he couldn't help but feel a rising sense of fear. What kind of creatures could do this to another being? And what did she mean by "they're coming for me"? I was part of an experiment, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. A weapon they created, something that can survive in the harshest environments. They tested me on different worlds, different climates, until I broke free. I ran. But they won't stop coming. Nathan's mind reeled, trying to process her words. A weapon. An experiment? This was beyond anything he'd ever encountered. He'd always known the galaxy was vast, full of strange life and faraway stars, but hearing her say it so plainly, it didn't feel real. Why here? He asked almost instinctively. Why come to a frozen world like this? They'll find you. I had nowhere else to go, she said, her eyes downcast. The storm was my only chance. They've been tracking me for weeks, but the blizzard is my protection. She looked up at him, her gaze intense. I thought you could help me? Nathan felt a lump form in his throat. He didn't know how to help her. This was more than anything he could handle, more than any human could handle. The storm outside raged on, but in the cabin, it felt as though the temperature had dropped even further. The sense of danger was palpable, thick in the air, and Nathan could feel it tightening around his chest. I don't know what to do, he admitted, taking a step back and running a hand through his unkempt hair. This isn't something I can just solve. I'm not equipped for this. The woman looked at him, her yellow eyes flickering with something like desperation. You've kept me safe so far, haven't you? They can't find me in this storm. You have to help me. If they get me, they'll use me to destroy everything, Everything you know. Her words felt like a punch in the gut. Destroy everything? Nathan struggled to comprehend the weight of her words. It didn't make sense. Why would anyone create something like her, something so powerful, yet so fragile at the same time? They're going to destroy your world, she repeated, her voice cold now, almost as though she were stating a simple fact. My creators? They're not like you. They're not human. They're something else. They see the universe as their laboratory. Planets are their playgrounds and lives are their experiments. Nathan felt a chill race up his spine. This wasn't just about her. It was about something much larger. Her fear, the desperation in her voice, it was contagious. The storm outside began to howl even louder, as though it sensed the threat closing in. They're already here, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Nathan turned sharply, his eyes scanning the cabin. He could feel it now. The air seemed thicker, the energy in the room heavier. Something was wrong. The wind had stopped howling, and in its place was a heavy silence, an unnatural stillness. She stood, her form trembling, her silver hair floating around her as if caught in some invisible current. They found me, she said. They know I'm here. Nathan felt his heart race. He glanced at the door, instinctively reaching for his rifle again, but something deep in his gut told him that wasn't going to help. Not now. The woman, her hands now trembling in the air as though sensing something too, stepped toward him, her eyes wild with fear. We have to leave. Now. Before he could respond, a loud crash echoed from outside the cabin, sharp and sudden, followed by the sound of something heavy scraping against the walls. It was as though the storm itself had given way to the forces that had been following her. The creatures she spoke of were close. The woman looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of panic and determination. We can't stay here. They'll destroy everything. The crash outside rattled the walls of the cabin, sending a shiver through Nathan's spine. His eyes flicked toward the door, the wooden frame groaning as the storm outside seemed to intensify once more. But this wasn't the wind. This was something else, something far more dangerous. Nathan's grip tightened around the rifle, but even as his hand wrapped around the cold metal, he felt the deep uncertainty gnaw at him. The woman had said it herself, they were here. And the way she looked at him, wide-eyed, pleading, made him realize that no amount of firepower or survival training could prepare him for what was coming. Who are they? He asked, his voice shaky as though speaking the words aloud made the threat more real. She took a step closer to him, her body trembling with fear, her voice hoarse as she answered. They're called the Zarka. A race of conquerors, creators, and destroyers. They don't care about worlds. They care about power, about what they can take. And they will stop at nothing to get what they want. Nathan's pulse quickened. The name alone sent a chill down his spine, and the urgency in her voice only made the situation feel more dire. He had to think, and quickly. But everything around him was crumbling, the storm outside, the impending threat, and now the woman who seemed to be his only hope for survival. She was, after all, the one who could keep him alive. There's no time, she said, her voice filled with panic as she grabbed his arm. We have to move. They'll breach the hut any moment. Nathan jerked his arm away instinctively, his heart racing in his chest. How do you know they'll breach it? The door's solid. We can lock it down. Wait them out. They can't be stopped by doors, she said, her eyes locked on the walls, as if seeing something beyond what was visible to Nathan. They'll break through it with or without the storm. They have technology that... A sudden, violent thud shook the cabin, cutting her words short. The entire structure trembled as if it had been struck by a massive force. Nathan could feel the vibrations in the floorboards beneath his boots. The impact had come from outside, followed by an eerie silence that was quickly suffocating the room. The woman's eyes were wide, pupils dilating with fear. They're here, she whispered. We're running out of time. Nathan rushed to the door, locking it as best he could, then turned to the woman. His mind was racing. Every instinct told him to fight, but how could he fight an enemy like this? What do we do now? He asked, trying to maintain some semblance of control. She took a breath, trying to steady herself, but the tremors in her hands gave away her terror. We need to hide. I know a place. A cave. It's the only place where they won't think to look for me. But we have to leave now. There's no time to waste. Nathan didn't hesitate. Grabbing his pack from the corner, he quickly began shoving supplies inside. Extra ammo, a few ration bars, a thermal blanket. The wind howled outside again, louder than ever, but there was no mistaking the threat outside. His hand shot toward the rifle one more time, but the woman grabbed his arm, her grip almost desperate. Not that way, she said. They'll track us if you use that. You'll lead them straight to us? His brow furrowed. What do you mean? If we don't fight back, we'll be sitting ducks. They can track energy signatures, she explained quickly, her voice trembling but controlled. Every weapon, every piece of technology you carry, every heat source, they can detect it. We need to leave everything behind and move fast, silently. The storm is our only cover. Nathan cursed under his breath, understanding the gravity of the situation. He quickly discarded the rifle and strapped the pack to his back. All right, let's go, he said, his voice low, filled with resolve. The woman moved swiftly toward the back of the cabin, her long silver hair glinting in the dim light. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, and that gave Nathan a small shred of hope. Maybe she wasn't as helpless as he thought. The two of them moved cautiously through the cabin, staying low and quiet as the storm's howl picked up once more. The air inside was thick with tension, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the wind and the snow outside. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline beginning to kick in, but he kept his mind focused on the task at hand. He had to trust her. She was his only chance. She stopped at the back door, which led to a small outdoor shed that Nathan used for storing firewood and other tools. The woman glanced at him, her yellow eyes filled with urgency. This way. The cave is about a mile from here. We can make it before they catch up. Nathan nodded, gripping the edge of the doorframe as the woman pushed it open. The cold blast of air hit him like a slap to the face, and he had to squint against the biting wind. The blizzard was thick, too thick to see more than a few feet ahead, but the woman stepped forward without hesitation, her movements fluid and purposeful. The snow crunched underfoot as they began their trek, the wind cutting through their clothes, stinging their skin. Nathan kept his pace steady, doing his best to keep up, but the storm seemed to be against them at every turn. The snowflakes whipped around them like a living thing trying to block their path, but they pushed forward. Every few steps, Nathan would glance back, expecting to see something, anything, chasing them. But the wind swallowed up everything behind them. It felt like they were walking through a vast, empty world, where the storm itself was their only companion. Stay close, the woman said, her voice almost lost to the wind. We're not alone. They're watching us. I can feel them. Nathan clenched his fists, trying to push aside the rising panic. How do you know? She didn't answer at first, her eyes darting over the landscape, as though searching for signs of movement in the swirling storm. Then after a long pause she spoke again, her voice barely audible. They can track heat signatures. They'll be using the storm to mask their movements, but they're not far behind. Nathan's blood ran cold. He could feel it now, the presence that had been lurking at the edges of his awareness, like a shadow in the storm. He'd never been hunted before. Never had something, or someone, wanted him dead so badly. But as they trudged through the storm, he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. They were being hunted, and it was only a matter of time before the predator found its prey. The woman's pace quickened, and Nathan had no choice but to keep up. Their destination was clear now, the cave. But with every step he couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The Zarka were coming and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. And what they wanted was her. The storm howled, a savage, relentless beast that tore at Nathan's skin, driving the cold deeper into his bones with each step. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, moved ahead of him like a shadow, her silver hair flying behind her in the wind. She seemed to know the terrain instinctively, as if the blizzard didn't touch her at all. Nathan, on the other hand, was struggling. The wind cut through his clothes, the snow piling up around his boots, making every step feel like wading through wet cement. His breath came in ragged gasps, the cold seeping into his lungs, but he kept pushing forward. Not much farther, she called over her shoulder, her voice almost drowned out by the storm. Nathan wanted to respond, but his throat was too dry, his voice lost to the roar of the blizzard. He just nodded, his eyes scanning the whiteness around them. The sense of urgency gnawed at him. They weren't alone. He could feel it even though he couldn't see anything beyond the storm. A part of him wanted to ask more questions, wanted to know exactly who the Zarka were and why they were after her, but something about the look on her face kept him from speaking. She was focused, and every now and then her gaze would flick to the sky, the horizon, scanning for something. Nathan couldn't tell what, but it was as if she knew they were being watched. We need to make it to the cave before they see us, she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the howling wind. Hurry? They trudged on in silence, moving as quickly as they could through the snow. Nathan's mind raced. What was she running from? Who were these Zarka? Were they human? What did she mean by use me? There was a deep, dark history behind her words, one that seemed far beyond anything Nathan could comprehend. And yet, she was here and he was stuck with her in the middle of a deadly storm, with an unknown enemy hot on their heels. The snow was beginning to blur his vision, making the world feel unreal. It was as though they were walking through a dream, or a nightmare. Every step seemed to take them further into an abyss, a place where the storm itself seemed to close in, becoming suffocating and disorienting. Suddenly she stopped. Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing as she looked toward the horizon, her body tensing. Nathan froze. His heart skipped a beat. What is it? She didn't answer immediately, her gaze locked on something he couldn't see. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind, the driving snow. Then her eyes flicked toward him, filled with urgency. They're coming. Too close, she whispered harshly. We need to move now. Before Nathan could respond, she grabbed his arm and began pulling him forward at a sprint. His breath caught in his throat, the force of her grip like a vice. He stumbled, trying to keep pace, but the snow was deep, the wind biting at his face, and it felt like every step was a battle. Still he pushed on, his boots heavy and sluggish in the snow, but her strength dragged him onward. It was faster, stronger, more determined than he could ever hope to be in the face of such a storm. He didn't know how much time passed. It could have been minutes or hours. The world had become a blur of white and gray, a constant vortex of swirling snow. His legs burned from the effort, and his chest ached from the cold, but he refused to stop. Then, just as he thought he couldn't go any further, he saw it. A shadow in the snow, barely visible but unmistakable. The entrance to a cave. The woman was already moving toward it, her form merging with the darkness as she disappeared into the blackness of the cave. Nathan stumbled after her, gasping for breath, and stepped inside. The air was warmer here, and for a moment he felt a flicker of relief. But that feeling was fleeting. The weight of their situation was still hanging over him. Inside the cave it was dark, unnervingly so. The walls were jagged and uneven, the ground uneven beneath their feet. There was no sound except for their breathing, heavy and strained from the effort of running. Nathan took a few moments to catch his breath, his back against the rough stone, trying to steady himself. We're not safe here yet, the woman said, her voice cold but with a hard edge of fear in it. She was looking back toward the entrance, her body tense as though she expected something to emerge from the shadows. Why here? Nathan asked, his voice hoarse from the cold and exertion. Why a cave? Why not a shelter or somewhere we can fight back? She didn't look at him. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on the entrance. The Zarka can't sense us in here, not if we're still. The storm is masking our heat signatures. This cave has properties. It's a place they won't think to search. They won't expect us to hide here. We bought ourselves some time. Nathan swallowed hard, glancing around. The cave was small, barely more than a hollow in the mountainside, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the deadly storm outside. Still, something about it felt wrong. It was too quiet, too still. Like they were waiting for something. He was about to ask her more questions when he heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. Footsteps, barely a whisper in the snow, but enough to make his heart stop. The woman stiffened, her eyes flicking to the entrance. Her expression hardened, and she stepped further into the darkness of the cave. She motioned for Nathan to follow her, and he did, his heart pounding in his chest. He kept his breathing shallow, the air in the cave cool against his skin, and he tried to silence the voice in his head screaming that they weren't alone. There's no time to waste, she whispered. We need to stay hidden. They're near. Nathan's mind raced. The Zarka were close, and he could feel the tension growing with every second. He wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't prepared to be hunted like an animal. The sound of the storm outside grew louder, but it wasn't the wind this time. It was the crackling of a strange, otherworldly noise, something mechanical, something unnatural. It was the Zarka, he realized. They were out there searching. The woman pulled him further into the cave, and as they moved deeper, the temperature dropped. It was as if the darkness had swallowed them whole, and the cold was creeping into their very bones. Nathan's breath fogged in the air, his pulse quickening as the eerie sound of the Zarka's search intensified. He couldn't tell if they were right outside the cave or miles away. But something told him that no matter how far away they were, they would eventually find them. And when they did, there would be no escape. The woman's voice broke the silence again, her tone sharp and urgent. Stay close. They can't detect us in the dark, but if we make a sound... She didn't need to finish. Nathan knew. If they were discovered, there would be no second chance. The Zarka were relentless. And now he realized they were in the heart of the storm, surrounded by shadows with no way out. The cave was dark, unnervingly so. Nathan's eyes struggled to adjust to the thick blackness that enveloped them, every sound magnified in the stillness. His breath was shallow and quick, his pulse thrumming loudly in his ears. The woman had led him deeper into the cave, further away from the entrance, where the shadows seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive. Each step echoed in the confined space, and the chill in the air gnawed at his bones as if the cave itself were alive, a living thing that breathed with them. He had no idea how long they had been walking. The passageways twisted and turned, the walls jagged and uneven, but the woman moved with purpose, as if she had been here 1,000 times before. She led him deeper, her silver hair a faint, luminous trail in the darkness. Nathan tried to match her pace, though his legs ached and his mind raced. They were still being hunted. He could feel it in the air, the pressing weight of danger that seemed to hover just beyond the reach of the storm outside. He had the distinct impression that even the cave could not hide them forever. "Where are we going?" he whispered, his voice sounding alien in the quiet, too loud for the space around them. He hadn't meant to speak at all, but the silence was stifling. The air seemed to press in on him from all sides. The woman didn't respond immediately. Her footsteps were light, almost silent on the rocky floor. She was moving with an unsettling calmness, a sense of control that Nathan didn't feel. After a moment she slowed, finally stopping in front of a narrow fissure in the wall. The space was tight, the opening just wide enough for one person to squeeze through. The woman glanced over her shoulder, her eyes gleaming faintly in the dark. "This way," she said, her voice steady, though there was something faintly strained in it. Nathan followed her without question, though he was beginning to feel a twinge of discomfort, an unease that wasn't just from the cold or the storm. There was something about this place, something about her, that felt wrong. He couldn't put his finger on it, but every instinct in him was screaming that he didn't truly understand what he had gotten himself into. This woman, her strange story, the Zara, none of it made sense. He had been dragged into something far beyond what he could comprehend, and now there was no turning back. He squeezed through the narrow crack, the rough stone scraping against his back as he pushed forward. The air inside felt thick, humid, in stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The cave narrowed further as they descended, the passageway becoming more like a tunnel. It felt like they were going deeper into the heart of the earth, as if the very ground was closing in on them. At the end of the tunnel, the woman stopped. Nathan nearly bumped into her as she froze, her form tense, her head tilted slightly, listening. Her expression hardened, eyes scanning the darkness ahead. "What is it?" Nathan whispered, his throat dry. His senses were heightened now, his body on edge. He couldn't see anything, but something in the air had changed. "They're close," she murmured, barely audible. "Too close." Nathan's heart skipped a beat. He strained his ears, but there was no sound from the entrance, nothing that would indicate they were being pursued. He tried to steady his breathing, to listen harder, but the air in the tunnel was thick, muffling everything. It felt as though time had slowed, the world narrowing down to the two of them in this cramped, suffocating space. "What are they?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. The word Zarkaj had sounded terrifying enough, but it still didn't make sense. He needed more, anything to help him understand what he was up against. The woman hesitated for a moment, her lips parting as if she were choosing her words carefully. "They're not like us. They're predators. They've taken many worlds, many species. They don't just conquer, they test, modify, change what they capture. I'm one of their experiments." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had assumed she was being metaphorical when she spoke of being experimented on, but now it was clear she wasn't. She was something made, something altered, twisted in ways that Nathan couldn't begin to fathom. "I don't understand," he said, struggling to put his thoughts together. "You're not human?" The woman's eyes flicked to him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of pain in her gaze. "Not entirely. I was made, created, a weapon. My people, my real people, were destroyed by the Zarka, but I was spared. I was meant to be something they could use." Nathan shook his head, his mind racing to process the flood of information. "But you escaped." Her face hardened, the sadness vanishing behind a wall of icy resolve. "I escaped. I broke free, but they won't stop coming for me. For us." The air in the tunnel felt heavier now, the weight of her words sinking in. Nathan didn't know what to make of it all. He had thought he was helping someone lost in the storm, someone innocent. But this was something entirely different. He had no idea who or what she was, and yet she had become his only ally in this insane chase. Suddenly, the faint sound of movement echoed through the tunnel. A soft scraping sound, too close, too deliberate. Nathan's heart stopped. "They're here," the woman said, her voice low but steady. She grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the farthest corner of the narrow tunnel. Stay quiet. Don't move. Nathan's pulse thundered in his ears as they crouched, hidden in the shadows of the cave. The silence was suffocating, but his eyes burned as he tried to peer through the darkness. He could hear them now, the soft hiss of something mechanical, the faintest scrape of boots against the rocky ground. The Zarka were close, so close that Nathan could almost feel their presence pressing in from all sides. The woman's grip tightened around his arm, and for the first time he could sense her fear. Real raw fear. It wasn't just for herself, it was for both of them. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours, the only sounds being the distant howls of the storm and the faint metallic noises growing louder as the Zarka approached. Nathan could feel his heartbeat in his throat, could feel the sweat on his brow freezing against the cold stone of the tunnel. Every muscle in his body was taut, ready to spring into action, but the woman held him back, her eyes locked on the darkness ahead, her expression determined. They'll pass us, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But only if we don't make a sound? Nathan nodded, his throat too tight to speak. His mind raced, trying to figure out what to do, how to survive. But no matter how much he thought, one question remained. What would they do when the Zarka found them? And when they did, how much of their humanity would they lose in the process? The cold seeped into Nathan's bones as they crouched in the narrow tunnel, hidden from view. The darkness pressed in on all sides, suffocating, but it was nothing compared to the suffocating silence between him and the woman. Every second felt like an eternity, every breath an act of defiance against the stillness that surrounded them. Nathan's heartbeat thudded in his ears, the pounding rhythm a constant reminder of how fragile their position was. They had to remain quiet. If the Zarka discovered them here, it would be the end. He didn't even know if he could fight back against these creatures, let alone survive. But one thing was certain, the woman knew more than she was telling him. She had been hiding something, he could feel it. There were secrets in her eyes, ones that didn't belong to a refugee or a victim, but to someone far more dangerous. Someone who had been forged in the fires of survival, someone who had fought, and likely killed, just to make it this far. Nathan didn't know what her true motives were, but he couldn't afford to question her now. Not when his life and possibly his soul was at stake. The footsteps outside the tunnel grew louder, closer, and Nathan tensed, every muscle locked in place. The woman's grip on his arm was strong, almost painful, but he didn't dare pull away. She wasn't holding him for comfort, she was holding him for survival. Every instinct told him that this woman was far more than she appeared. Suddenly the footsteps stopped. It was as if the very air had grown thick with tension. Nathan's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he thought his heart might stop altogether. They were so close now, too close. He could hear the soft hiss of air, the sound of alien voices murmuring, too garbled to understand but unmistakably alien. He shivered at the thought of what they could be planning. The Zarka were not just hunters, they were hunters with purpose. They didn't just kill, they calculated, they studied, they destroyed with efficiency. Stay still, the woman whispered, her voice barely audible in the dense silence. Don't make a sound. Don't move. Nathan nodded, sweat trickling down the back of his neck, though he hadn't dared to make a sound. The silence stretched on, each moment longer than the last. The sound of their pursuers outside, their alien inhuman footfalls, was like a countdown to their discovery. But then, just as Nathan thought he might lose his nerve, the footsteps began to fade, gradually growing quieter until they were almost gone. The woman's tense form relaxed just slightly, though she didn't let go of Nathan's arm. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the tunnel ahead. Nathan held his breath, waiting for her signal, praying that they hadn't been detected. He wasn't sure how long they stayed like that, motionless, frozen in place, but eventually the sounds from outside grew distant, until there was nothing but the eerie quiet of the cave once more. After a long, excruciating moment, the woman slowly let go of his arm, her grip easing from a vice to something more comforting. She straightened up, her eyes still scanning the darkness around them. They're gone, she said, her voice still tense but carrying a sense of relief. Nathan let out the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, his shoulders sagging in exhaustion. He felt his knees give way beneath him and he sank against the cold stone wall, his breath ragged. His pulse slowed, though his mind was still racing. How did you know they'd leave? He asked quietly, his voice hoarse from the strain. He looked up at her, his mind reeling from the encounter. The woman didn't answer immediately. She stepped away from the tunnel's entrance and into a small alcove further down the passage. Her expression was unreadable, her face flickering in the dim light like a ghost. She seemed distant, caught in her thoughts. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet and measured. I've been hunted by the Zarka for a long time. I know their patterns, their methods. They're not omniscient. They can be tricked. But, she paused, glancing back at Nathan with a sharp, almost bitter look. In her eyes. It's a dangerous game. And one I don't always win. Nathan nodded, his mind still spinning. And the cave? How do we know they won't find us here? She shook her head. The cave is special. It's not just a place to hide. There's something about it that confuses their sensors. The way the rock absorbs heat signatures, the way the wind moves through it. It disrupts their tracking. They don't know exactly how it works, but they know it's a dead zone for their sensors. If we stay quiet and still, they'll never know we're here. Nathan had no reason to doubt her. Everything about her exuded a confidence that suggested she had survived far worse than this. The question gnawing at him, though, was whether that confidence came from knowledge, or something darker. You said you were one of their experiments, Nathan said slowly, watching her carefully. What does that mean? What did they do to you? The woman's face hardened at the question. Her eyes flicked away, her lips pressing into a thin line. She didn't answer right away, and for a long moment, Nathan thought she might refuse to speak at all. But then she sighed, a long, heavy exhale that seemed to release something from her. They altered me. Changed my physiology. Enhanced it. I'm faster, stronger, more resilient than I was before, but it comes with a price. Her voice softened, though there was a hardness to it. I can feel them in me. The Zarka, the experiments they did on me, it's all still inside. The more I resist them, the more I fight them, the harder it becomes to maintain control. Nathan stared at her, his mind racing. You're telling me, they changed you into something else? Something not human? She nodded, her eyes dark with regret. Yes. But don't think for a second that I'm some kind of monster, Nathan. I'm still me. I've always been me. But I don't have the luxury of pretending that I'm the same as I was before they got their hands on me. Nathan swallowed, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He didn't know what to say. She wasn't just a victim like he'd assumed. She was something more, something that had been twisted, forged into a weapon. And yet, in spite of it all, she was still fighting. She hadn't given in to whatever the Zarka had done to her. She was still trying to survive. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It wasn't enough, but it was all he could offer. He couldn't imagine what she had gone through. But he could see it in her eyes now, the weight of everything she'd lost, and the price she'd paid to survive. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at him with a strange intensity, as though she were weighing him, measuring him against some unknown standard. Then, slowly, she reached into her pack and pulled out a small metallic device, the shape of which Nathan didn't recognize. You're not the only one who's been caught in the crossfire, Nathan, she said, her voice steady but tinged with something almost bitter. I didn't come here just for myself. I came here for you. Nathan frowned, confused. What do you mean? She pressed the device into his hand, her fingers cold against his skin. The Zarka are after more than just me. They're hunting you too. For reasons I can't explain, not yet. But trust me, if you want to stay alive, you need to use that device. It will protect you from them. At least for a while. Nathan's fingers tightened around the device, his mind reeling. Why didn't you tell me this before? Her gaze hardened, but there was no anger in her expression. Only a resigned sort of weariness. Because you didn't need to know. But now we have no choice. We're in this together whether you like it or not. Nathan's pulse quickened. He was in this, with her. Whether he liked it or not. And now, with the device in his hand, he had a choice to make. The woman had brought him this far, but how much longer could he trust her? Would he be making a mistake by depending on her, or would it be the only way to survive? The weight of the device in Nathan's hand was unlike anything he had ever felt before. It was small, sleek, and humming faintly with an energy that seemed to resonate with his own heartbeat. He could sense its potential, its power, even though he had no idea how it worked. The woman's words echoed in his mind, each one a ghostly warning. It will protect you, for a while. Her gaze was intense, unyielding as she studied him. There was no explanation coming, no reassurance, just the cold fact that this was their reality now. His heart pounded with uncertainty. The device felt foreign, alien. How could he trust it? But then again, what other choice did he have? He couldn't stay hidden forever. And as much as he wanted to believe that he could just escape, the harsh truth was beginning to sink in. Survival in this world wasn't just about running. It was about adapting, about becoming something new. The woman didn't wait for him to respond. She stood up slowly, her body lithe and graceful, yet there was a hardness in her movements, a weariness that Nathan had come to recognize in her. She was used to this. She had lived with it for so long that it was second nature. "We can't stay here much longer," she said, her voice calm, though it carried an undercurrent of urgency. "The Zarka will circle back. They're thorough. And they won't stop until they have what they came for." Nathan's fingers tightened around the device and he stood up, forcing himself to focus. "What exactly did they come for?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the stress of the past hours. The woman hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking to the dark tunnel ahead. It was clear that whatever answer she was about to give wasn't something she wanted to reveal. Yet after a moment she spoke, her words barely above a whisper. "You," she said, her gaze steady and unwavering. "They came for you?" The revelation hit Nathan like a blow to the chest. He blinked, trying to wrap his mind around the words, but they didn't make sense. "Me? Why would they be after me? I'm just a guy, nothing special." The woman's eyes softened for the briefest of moments, as if she were trying to find the words to make him understand. "You're not just a guy. You've been marked. By the Zarka. They've been watching you, Nathan. For a long time." He shook his head, feeling a rush of confusion and disbelief. "Watching me? Oh, why?" "I don't know yet," she said, her voice a little more strained now. "But what I do know is that the Zarka aren't interested in you because of anything you've done, they're interested in you because of what you could do. They believe you're the key to something big." Nathan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to think. His life had been so ordinary before all of this. Now, suddenly he was a pawn in some twisted game played by creatures who were light years beyond anything he could comprehend. "Key to what?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. He knew the answer, but he had to hear it from her. "I don't know. But I know they want it. And they'll stop at nothing to get it." The words hung heavy between them. It was clear that the woman, despite her knowledge and her skills, didn't have all the answers either. They were both caught in a tangled web of mystery, and it seemed like every step forward led them further into the unknown. "We need to move," she said, cutting through the tension. Her gaze was once again focused, alert. "I'll lead the way. You follow?" Nathan nodded, clenching the device in his hand. There was no time to argue, no time to ask more questions. The Zarka would be back soon, and he needed to trust her. For better or worse, she was the only one who knew how to survive in this world. They moved quickly through the winding passageways of the cave, the darkness closing in around them once again. Nathan could feel the weight of the storm still howling outside, its fury a distant echo in his mind. But inside the cave, it was as though the world had come to a halt. There were no other sounds, only the quiet shuffle of their footsteps and the steady rhythm of their breath. The tension hung thick in the air, like a storm about to break. The woman led him deeper into the labyrinth of tunnels, each turn more confusing than the last. It felt like they were descending into the heart of the earth itself. The further they went, the darker it became, until even the faint glow of her silver hair seemed swallowed up by the shadows. "Do you know where you're going?" Nathan asked, his voice barely audible. The woman didn't answer immediately, but Nathan could feel her pace quickening. Her focus was absolute, her every movement calculated, efficient. She was leading them somewhere with purpose, but he still didn't know where. The sense of dread gnawed at him, the uncertainty of their path making his stomach twist. What had she meant when she said they couldn't stay hidden forever? "I know where we need to go," she finally said, her voice firm, almost reassuring. "We just need to get to the center of the cave. It's the safest place. The Zarka won't expect us to be there." Nathan opened his mouth to ask more, but then a sound cut through the silence. A faint scraping, the sound of something scraping against rock. It was distant at first, but growing closer. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The woman's expression hardened, and she turned to him, her face drawn tight with urgency. "They're here. We don't have much time." Before Nathan could react, she grabbed his arm again, her grip almost painful, and pulled him along with her. They sprinted down the narrow passageway, her movements fluid and fast, his own legs struggling to keep pace. The echoes of their footsteps seemed to reverberate off the stone walls, amplifying their every move. They had to move faster. There was no time to waste. The sounds of the Zarka grew louder, more distinct now, metallic footfalls, mechanical whirring, the unmistakable hum of their advanced technology. Nathan didn't know what they were carrying or how many of them there were, but it didn't matter. They were closing in on them. The woman skidded to a halt in front of a large, jagged rock formation, and Nathan almost collided with her. She motioned for him to crouch down behind the rocks, her eyes darting around, scanning the passage ahead. "We'll wait here," she whispered. "Just for a moment. We'll have to make a run for it soon. Nathan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the device in his hand, as though it was pulsing with energy, waiting for the moment it would be needed. But what exactly was it supposed to do? And how would it help them escape the Zarka? He didn't have the answers, but for now he had to trust the woman. They didn't have a choice. They were in this together whether he liked it or not. Suddenly the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder and Nathan's pulse quickened. They were almost there. The woman's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, Nathan saw something new in them, a flicker of fear. It was brief, gone as quickly as it appeared, but it was enough to send a chill through his spine. "Stay low," she whispered, her voice like ice. And then, without another word, they waited, their breaths held in the suffocating darkness, as the Zarka closed in on their position. The air was thick with tension as Nathan crouched behind the jagged rock formation, trying to steady his breathing. The woman was beside him, her form almost blending into the shadows, her gaze focused entirely on the approaching Zarka. The footsteps were unmistakable now, heavy, deliberate, with a mechanical quality that made Nathan's skin crawl. There was no mistaking it. They were getting closer. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest, each beat a loud reminder of how little time they had. He glanced at the woman, her eyes sharp and calculating, every muscle in her body taut with anticipation. She wasn't just ready to fight, she was prepared to survive no matter what. Nathan envied her composure. If he were alone he'd have already panicked. But with her beside him there was still hope, faint as it was. "Stay close," she whispered, her voice low but firm. Her breath was steady, and Nathan realized that, despite the danger, she was in control. "When I say go, run. Don't look back." Nathan nodded, his grip tightening around the device she had given him. It felt almost alive in his hand, the small humming pulse a reminder that whatever it was, it had a purpose, and that purpose might be their only chance of survival. But what did she mean by run? He had no idea what they were running toward or what they were running from. The scraping sound of the Zarka's footsteps grew louder, closer, until Nathan could hear the faint whirring of their mechanical armor, the sharp hiss of their breathing. He could feel the vibrations through the ground, a deep, resonating hum that made his chest tighten. The creatures weren't far, maybe only a few meters away. Nathan barely dared to move, but his eyes flicked toward the woman, searching for any sign that she would make the first move. Her eyes met his for a split second, and then she pointed toward the darkness further ahead. Her lips moved silently, now. In that instant, everything snapped into focus. Without thinking, Nathan followed her lead, sprinting forward as silently as he could manage. His heart was in his throat, his legs burning with the effort, but he didn't dare look back. The woman was already several paces ahead of him, her movements fluid and swift, her body a shadow in the darkness. They didn't dare make a sound as they ran, their footsteps barely audible over the cacophony of the Zarka's pursuit. The woman darted through the tunnel, her figure weaving in and out of sight as she navigated the labyrinthine passages with an almost unnatural ease. Nathan struggled to keep up, the rock walls closing in on them as the narrow passages twisted and turned. They were headed deeper into the cave system now. The further they went, the less light there was, until Nathan's world was reduced to an endless void, broken only by the faint glow of the woman's silver hair ahead. His breath came in ragged gasps, his legs aching, but he kept pushing forward. He didn't know what they were running toward, but the thought of stopping, of being caught, was far worse than any fatigue. Finally, the woman came to a sudden stop. She pressed her back against the cold rock wall, motioning for Nathan to do the same. He slid to a halt beside her, breathless, trying to keep as quiet as possible. His ears were ringing from the effort, but the silence in the cave was deafening. The Zarka's footsteps were still echoing through the tunnels, but they seemed to be growing fainter now. Nathan dared to hope that they were losing them, that they might have found a momentary reprieve. The woman's expression was tense, her eyes scanning the darkness ahead. She held up a hand, signaling for Nathan to stay low. She was listening, her head slightly tilted, her posture poised like a predator. "They're not far behind," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But we're getting closer. The center of the cave, it's just ahead." Nathan nodded, but his mind was still spinning. The center of the cave? What did that even mean? He had no idea what kind of place they were heading to, but from the woman's urgency, it was clear that it was their only hope. There was nothing else, no backup, no plans beyond this point. Just the two of them and whatever lay ahead. Without warning, the woman turned and motioned for Nathan to follow. They moved again, this time slower, quieter, their footsteps barely making a sound as they slipped through the narrow tunnels. Nathan's eyes were fixed on her, his only guide in the pitch-black darkness. They moved for what felt like hours, but the air was getting colder, sharper, and Nathan felt a change in the atmosphere. It wasn't just the temperature, there was something else. A hum, faint but persistent, vibrating through the stone, resonating in the very walls of the cave. It was unnatural, almost as if the cave itself was alive. The woman's pace slowed even further, her body tense, her eyes narrowed. She held a hand up to signal for Nathan to stop. He complied instantly, pressing his back to the nearest wall, trying to control his breathing, his pulse hammering in his ears. The hum had grown louder, and now Nathan could feel it deep in his chest, a low vibration that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. There was something powerful ahead, something that had been here long before the Zarka had set foot on this planet. The woman stepped forward, her movements precise, each step measured. She didn't look back at Nathan, but he could see the concentration on her face. Whatever was ahead, she was ready. She knew this place, and whatever danger it held, she would face it head-on. They rounded a corner, and the narrow passageway suddenly opened up into a vast cavern. Nathan stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening at the sight. The cavern was unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls glowed faintly with an eerie blue light, and the floor was covered in smooth, glassy stone that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly energy. In the center of the cavern there was a structure, a massive, angular shape made of the same shimmering stone. It seemed ancient, yet impossibly advanced, a fusion of alien technology and natural formations. The hum that had filled the cave intensified here, vibrating through the air, resonating with the very core of the cavern. Nathan could feel the power radiating from it, and it was both mesmerizing and terrifying. "This is it," the woman said softly, her voice barely rising above the hum. "The center of the cave. The Zarka know about it, but they don't understand it. No one does, not really." Nathan stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman didn't answer immediately. She was staring at the structure, her eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "I don't know what it is," she said finally. "But I know it's the key to everything. It's why they're after you." Nathan frowned, confusion deepening. "Why me?" She turned to him then, her eyes intense, her expression hard. "Because you're the one who can activate it. You're the one they've been watching. The one they've been waiting for." Nathan's pulse quickened. He could feel the weight of her words sinking in, but he still didn't understand. What do you mean? I don't know anything about this place. I don't know how to." "You will," she interrupted, her voice firm. "You'll understand soon enough. But for now we don't have much time. The Zarka are close, and once they realize what's here, they won't stop until they take it. And you?" Nathan's hand clenched around the device once more, and he took a step forward toward the glowing structure. He didn't know what was going to happen, but in this place, it felt like everything had led him to this moment. It felt like this was his only chance, not just to survive, but to understand what was really at stake. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around him. And with that, they stepped into the heart of the storm. The silence that followed was unlike anything Nathan had ever experienced. It was as if time itself had paused, holding its breath, waiting. The hum of the cavern's heart reverberated through his body, each pulse of energy vibrating through the floor beneath his feet, settling into the marrow of his bones. The air felt charged, thick with possibility and danger, and Nathan couldn't help but feel the weight of it all, the pressure of something ancient and immense, something that had been waiting for him. The woman stood beside him, her posture rigid, her eyes locked on the massive structure at the center of the cavern. Her hands were tense, fingers twitching as though she was preparing for something that was as inevitable as the rising tide. She didn't speak, but her expression told him everything he needed to know. This was it. The moment of reckoning. Nathan looked at the structure again, feeling the weight of its presence. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, a strange blend of organic and mechanical, a monument that felt both alive and impossibly ancient. Its surface shimmered with the same bluish glow that filled the cavern, and strange symbols, glowing faintly, danced across the stone like living inscriptions. "What is this place?" Nathan whispered, more to himself than to the woman. She didn't answer immediately, but her eyes flicked toward him, the faintest hint of sadness in them. "I don't know what it is, only that it's been here for millennia. Long before the Zarka ever set foot on this planet." Her voice was strained, almost reverent. "But I do know that whatever happens next, it will change everything. It has to." Nathan took a hesitant step forward, drawn toward the structure like a moth to a flame. The pull was undeniable. He could feel something inside him, something buried deep, awakening. The device in his hand pulsed in time with the hum of the cavern, a rhythm that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. It was calling him, and for the first time he felt that whatever this thing was, whatever it could do, he was meant to be a part of it. "Don't be afraid," the woman said softly, her voice carrying an edge of determination. "It's not just you. We're in this together." Nathan turned to her, the uncertainty in his eyes momentarily flashing. Together? He didn't feel like he was in control anymore. The device, the structure, it all felt so much bigger than him. "I don't even know what I'm supposed to do here." "You'll know," she said simply. "You have to." Her words had an unexpected weight to them, and despite the fear gnawing at his gut, Nathan couldn't deny the truth in them. He didn't understand it, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. They had come too far, and whatever this was, it was his only chance. With one last glance at the woman, Nathan stepped closer to the structure. As he approached, the symbols on its surface seemed to pulse in response to his presence, glowing brighter with each step. The device in his hand hummed more intensely as though it recognized the significance of the moment. A strange warmth spread through him, as if the structure itself was reaching out, calling to him in a way he couldn't explain. He reached out tentatively, fingers brushing the surface of the stone. The instant he made contact, the entire cavern seemed to come alive. The hum intensified, rising to a deafening pitch. The symbols on the structure blazed with light, spiraling around him like a vortex of energy. Nathan could feel his body vibrating, his senses overwhelmed by the flood of power that rushed through him. A blinding flash of light enveloped him, and for a moment he couldn't see or hear anything. Everything went silent, as if the world itself had paused. His mind swam with visions, alien landscapes, star systems, ancient civilizations long forgotten, and a vast, dark expanse stretching out before him. He saw the Zara, their faces contorted with greed, their cold, calculating eyes focused on the very structure he was touching. He saw their desperation, their hunger for power, and their understanding that this place was the key to their future. But then, just as quickly, the visions faded, replaced by the raw, primal sense of knowing. It was as if everything, the secrets of the universe, the true nature of the structure, and his role in it, clicked into place. Nathan gasped, stepping back from the structure as the light began to fade. The energy around him seemed to settle, and the hum dimmed to a faint vibration in the background. He looked down at the device in his hand, which had gone still, its warmth receding. The overwhelming flood of knowledge had subsided, but it hadn't left him unchanged. Something deep inside him had shifted. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he knew it. The woman was standing a few feet away, her face pale, her eyes wide as she watched him. She took a hesitant step forward, her gaze scanning his face as if searching for something that would confirm that what she had hoped for had come to pass. "You did it," she whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You've activated it?" Nathan shook his head, still trying to process the overwhelming flood of information in his mind. I don't know how. It just happened." She took another step forward, her hands hovering at her sides. "You don't have to understand. You've done it. That's all that matters. The Zara will never be able to reach this place now. They won't understand it." Nathan frowned, his eyes still locked on the structure. It pulsed with a gentle glow now, as though it was at rest, waiting. "But what is it? What's inside it?" The woman's expression hardened, her voice low. "It's more than just a device, Nathan. It's a vault of knowledge. And it's a weapon capable of reshaping entire worlds." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "It was built long before the Zara came to this galaxy, by an ancient civilization that understood the dangers of too much power. They knew that the Zara would come, that they would try to seize control of this knowledge. And they built this to stop them." Nathan's heart raced. A weapon. The idea of it, of a power so immense that it could change the course of entire galaxies, made his mind reel. "But I didn't." "You were chosen," the woman interjected, her voice firm. "Not by us, but by something older, something beyond us. You're the key to unlocking this weapon. You're the one who can wield it, because the power you just felt, it's a part of you now. It's in your blood." Nathan stared at her, the enormity of her words sinking in slowly. This was bigger than survival. This was about shaping the future, about deciding the fate of entire civilizations. He wasn't just running from the Zara anymore. He was standing at the threshold of something far more dangerous, and far more significant. "You mean I have the power to stop them?" Nathan asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "To stop the Zara?" The woman nodded, her eyes fixed on him. "Yes. But it's not just about stopping them. It's about controlling the future. The fate of everything, the Zara, the civilizations across the stars, it all depends on you now. Nathan swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility crashing down on him. He wasn't ready for this. He didn't know how to wield that kind of power. But there was no turning back now. The device, the cavern, the weapon, it had all led him here. And now, with the fate of the galaxy in his hands, Nathan finally understood the true meaning of survival. The storm had just begun. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.